And back at it here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. We talk about what the Chiefs have to do this offseason here tonight. Will Orlando Brown Jr. be on this team next season? What about the wide receiver position for the Chiefs? Is JuJuSmith-Schuster a part of it? Do the Chiefs miss the toughness of Eric Bieniemy, his tough coaching style coming up this next season? Do they convert roster bonus on Patrick Mahomes, basically buying themselves $28 million worth of cap room this year, but setting up bigger problems in the future? Frank Clark, have we seen the last of him? ClydeEdwards-Helaire, is there any future for him with the Kansas City Chiefs, and how do you handle the final year of Chris Jones' contract? We tackle it all on this week's episode of the Red, Gold, and Bold.
You're listening to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Chiefs on planet Earth, breaking down the Chiefs like no one else can. Red, Gold, and Bold is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric Eager is the vice president of research and development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro is the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. The Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is now hiring for all positions: project manager, dump truck drivers, operators, and crew members. Starting pay up to $30 per hour based on experience, with paid time off and insurance, just to name a few of the benefits. Check out GannAsphalt.com for more info. Now, here are the hosts of the best Chiefs podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
And thank you very much, Curtis, as it is time for a little Red, Gold, and Bold. And gentlemen, let's dive right into it with the biggest questions of the offseason. First of all, we'll tell you, no, we're not live tonight, because everybody, that always seems to be a big question in the chat room. Like, are they live? Are they there? We are not. It's Combine Week, if you guys don't know, and that means a lot of traveling and a lot of activities for one Jeff Chadiha and Eric Eager. They'll be all over Indianapolis and everything going on at the Combine, which we'll talk about in our Two Deep podcast coming up next week after the Combine is over. So today we are taped up so that the guys can be traveling and getting things done. And it's an early morning, early rise for all of us. But let's start with the Orlando Brown topic. Jeff, a guy that looked like at times during this year, no chance he'd be back, right? A tough day. I would take phone calls on the radio show about people. They can't. They're not honestly going to keep Orlando Brown, are they? Then he rolls through the playoffs without giving up a sack. What do you do with Orlando Brown as you head into this offseason and free agency?
Well, I think you look in the mirror and you become very honest with yourself about how he was able to put up those kind of numbers you just mentioned. And strategically, they did a lot of things to help him out. Certainly in the Super Bowl, you saw the ball coming out fast. You saw them chipping. This situation got punted after training camp or during training camp because he was on a franchise tag. They were obviously focused on football. But if we go back to where we were on August 1st of last year, this was a guy who wanted to be paid elite left tackle money. He didn't have an agent. He had a friend in Jamal Brown who was talking about all these things that were going to happen. I think we go back to that place again. And I think that place muddles the picture for Orlando Brown being a part of this team. Now, again, if he wants to play on a reasonable contract like what they offered him last offseason, yeah, I can see him being part of this team. But I also feel like after the success they had, the numbers you just spouted, I think he's going to have an even more inflated sense of himself. He's going to want more money. He's going to make it a tougher negotiation. And inevitably, I think he'll be playing football someplace else.
When you send out the Sopranos tweet, Eric, and basically say, what was it? I know it had the Tony Soprano, but what was it? He said 0 sacks allowed.
Yeah,
choke on it or something like that. That does not sound like a guy who's like, yeah, I'm going to ask for less. I'm going to take what's offered. Sounds like a guy who feels like his value went up. Is Orlando Brown on this team next year?
Yeah, shout out to my wife for bringing me this tall cup of coffee this morning on a Sunday. Yeah, I mean, right. So you look at it from Orlando Brown's perspective. You were loyal to the Chiefs. You really only sat out like 1 week of training camp. You played on the tag. You didn't really complain much during the season. You didn't give up a sack. I mean, he didn't give up a sack after week 15. He did give up 7 pressures to Cincinnati, couple hurries each in their other playoff games. But from his perspective, you look at the rest of the market, and it's, you have Taylor Lewan is now cut. But it's really, I mean, left tackles are like starting pitching in baseball. Like if you want a veteran one in free agency, it's going to cost a lot of money. And so I think the Chiefs look at it and say, well, look, we can just apply the franchise tag again. I think the whole league knows who Orlando Brown is. But the problem is the whole league knows who Orlando Brown is in the other way. Like if you're a team like Chicago and you're just trying to get to average at left tackle and you have $100 million in free agency spending, Orlando Brown for $20 million APY doesn't seem all that bad. And there are other teams that are sort of in that boat, or $22 million or whatever he's looking for. So it's a weird situation. The Chiefs are in a worse situation as far as the cap is concerned. And we'll talk about it later, but like they need to free up $20 million just to apply the tag to Orlando Brown because of the 20% markup. But they don't have really a left tackle in the wings, right? Lucas Niang played barely anything this year. Prince Tigawagu, is not, I don't know if he's an option. We've always talked about Tooney, but I don't know if they view that as a realistic long-term option. So I think that, Orlando Brown's going to be feeling, his market a little bit more this offseason. I think ultimately the Chiefs tag him again and then use, the first few rounds of this draft as an opportunity with a better roster than they had a season ago to play him for the future at that position.
Yeah, and when we talk about it, Jeff, like this isn't the only thing that the Chiefs have to decide on, right? Like this is all interconnected. Frank Clark, there's $21 million you can find there. Patrick Mahomes, if you want to convert it to his roster bonus to signing bonus, that's $28 million there. There are ways to get there, but all of them require you to take hits into the future. The Frank Clark one seems to be the most obvious. The question is, what is his worth? Like, I think like what they would really like to do is get him done on a multi-year deal, because then they can shrink that number, right? They can make the first season cheap, give him the $1.5 million veteran minimum, signing bonus added on. He ends up counting $8-9 million this year, and you backload everything into the future. But is that something you want to do, or empowered by a championship? Do you do the smart fiscal thing and wave goodbye to everybody and just say, we're going to hang it all around Patrick Mahomes' neck to carry us no matter what deficiencies we might have?
I think you don't want to get into the game of, we got to have this guy to win a championship. There's only one guy you got to have to win a championship on this roster. He's playing quarterback. And so I understand Eric's philosophy, and that's a very realistic approach that could happen. But again, I think that they had to get into the ballgame of developing people to take spots. They did it at corner. They did it at safety. They've done it at other spots. And this is a time when you may have to take the hit, but knowing that your quarterback can rise you above some of these concerns you may have, I think it makes it easier to say goodbye to a guy like this. And again, and I like Orlando Brown a lot. And I give him credit for the way he played down the stretch and the way he's played at different times for this team over the course of the year. But this has always been a money play from my perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think he hung around because he felt like, okay, I'll do it for one more year and I'll see if I can get more money out of it. We'll talk about JuJuSmith-Schuster. It's the same situation. I mean, this is not college football where it's rah, rah, go team. We're all in it together as long as we can keep this thing going. These guys want to capitalize. And again, I'll be curious to see what the Chiefs offer him. I think there will be a discussion about a contract. I just don't think if that number is below $20 million a year, there's going to be any kind of real conversation.
Jeff, you brought up such a great point, which is that now that they've won, everybody's going to be like, I want, you know what I mean? Like this team only 15 to 20, depending on how you count the guys, were on the team in 19 that won the Super Bowl. So the remaining guys that got their team success, they got the ring on their finger now, are going to try to get their money. And the only question I think that muddies the waters here a little bit is what if it's both tackles? right? Because Andrew Wiley's a free agent, and to the point that I talked about it a few minutes ago, which is that starting tackles in the NFL, like guys like Wiley's like what, a 4 out of 10, right? Orlando Brown's like a 6 out of 10 probably, and a 4 out of 10, like teams like Jacksonville with a rookie quarterback last year were signing 4 out of 10s for a lot of money. And so does Orlando Brown have any more leverage with the fact that yes, the interior 3 are great, but Wiley's probably leaving, and so you have to replace both tackles if Orlando Brown goes? I think that's like a tricky one, and it muddies the waters of just simply like cutting the cord on Brown altogether.
I think Orlando Brown is going to be tremendously overpaid, and I think he's going to get a multi-year contract. I think that's what's coming. And then you hold your breath. Yeah, I think they're going to pay him. I think his performance down the stretch, they're going to say we got to have him, and we don't want to get 2 tackles for the reason Eric said. I mean, I think we look at it and try to be fiscally responsible in big picture. I don't think that they're going to have that approach. I think they're going to say we have to get this done, and I think I don't think they want to roll back Mahomes' deal. I think they'd like to have another year where they just eat the big cost and maybe save that for something in the rear view. And if they get Orlando Brown done and can bring his number down this year, that enables them to much more efficiently try to do that. Plus, they're going to look at this draft and there's no left tackle there, right? Like up there. Now, can you get a guy that's as good as Orlando Brown is during the regular season? Let's call him regular season Orlando Brown. You can. Will you go down that road?
So hold on. Are we? So now we have playoff Frank Clark, playoff Orlando Brown. Mm-hmm. Like, are we starting? Are we just spreading out the credit from Mahomes to all these other guys who happen to make a play or two in January and February?
I would walk and rely on the personnel department, or I would take whatever I could get in a trade and say I gave up a first when you maneuver it all around, ends up being a bottom of the first, and I got 3 years of play. Or was it 2? When did he come over? He came over
he played for 2 years for the Chiefs.
2 years worth of play, and then I got back a third or a second or whatever I could get back. That's what I would do, and I would head into the draft and say.
And then you could use that pick to move up and actually get an edge or a tackle that you actually like. Like that's they're estimated to have about 11 or 12 picks if you put comp picks, but then you can, if you get a pick for Orlando Brown, you can use that as part of a deal to go up and get a premium player, because at 31 you're just simply never going to get a tackle historically that's going to be
and let's also remember 2 years ago they did the same thing, right? They got rid of Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, and they found their way back to a championship.
Yes.
So I wouldn't be afraid to look at that historical reference and say, this could work out for us if we want to go down this road again.
I just think human nature says I'm not going to let that trade look like I made a mistake. So we're going to get it done. I think human nature is over what is smart business acumen. Again, I wouldn't do it, but I'm a cold-hearted, mathematically inclined person that would always make the right decision, counting on it adding up on down the road.
We pause for a second. Like, I was the most player-friendly person here for the first. Like, I was mine was the I think Orlando Brown plays for the team. I guess no, you said they're going to do a contract extension. I actually would tag him and let him go after this year, but I know that's you need to have the money to tag the player too, which they don't right now.
JuJuSmith-Schuster, you brought him up, Jeff. How do they handle the wideout spot? He's a free agent. Hardman's a free agent. Watson's a free agent. So they've got a lot of work to do. They did a lot of work last year. You would think people would want to come play, but the number one, you look at most of the free agent boards, who's the number one free agent? It's JuJuSmith-Schuster. Do you have a guy that can do what he did for less? I mean, where does this one fall in your book?
Yeah, he can read, and he was here for the same reason. He was here to resurrect himself or to rebrand himself, and he did it. And yeah, the wide receiver market is not strong at all. And so if you're a guy who's got a Super Bowl ring on his finger, has 100 catch, 1,400 yard season on your resume, you played with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, I think you're feeling pretty good about what free agency looks like for you right now. I mean, yeah, he's going to go out. He can go out and make money right now. And I don't think, again, the Chiefs would love to have him back, but I think there's a certain number as you get into the situation with the quarterback being more expensive where you want to be able to say this guy is good value for us. And JuJuSmith-Schuster at whatever, if he's getting even what Christian Kirk got last year from Jacksonville, is not a number you want to pay for if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he can get that pretty easily.
Is that what you think the number's going to be, Eric? And is it, whatever it is, too expensive for the Chiefs?
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because I think, like, obviously his market was hotter even like 2 or 3 months ago than it is now because he faded down the stretch. I think he was like mid-season a lock to get 1,000 yards in the regular season. He didn't get there. He was banged up in the AFC title game. He's banged, he really only went over, his player prop for the Super Bowl was 35.5 yards. He had only gone over that number once in the previous 6 games. And then, of course, he has a pretty good Super Bowl. Which
pretty good quarter or a pretty good drive.
Yeah. It wasn't even like
it's such a small spot.
If you bet the under on Smith-Schuster in the Super Bowl, you were feeling good until like you got blitzed with a few catches there. So I agree. I think that the thought was like 12 to 14 million was like a market that the Chiefs would want to play in with him. I just, as Jeff said, I just don't see that being a reality anymore. I especially now that they've won the Super Bowl. I think that, it's the same. Yeah, it's like the Desmond Howard, Larry Brown, like all that kind of thing. But way back in the day, it's like that guy's going to go somewhere. It's going to flop. He'll be back here in 2 years. But, I think that, yeah, at this point, you could have said, okay, you move on from MVS, bring in Juju. But I think now Juju's going to price himself out of that position.
Yeah, I think. Listen, when you look,
and you drafted Sky Moore in the second round, and you spent pretty decent capital on Kadarius Toney. Like, people are like, oh, they need to get wide receivers. I agree with that. They need depth, but like, you've put investments into this position last year in young players that, in theory, Sky Moore, if as a second round pick in year 2, should be able to mimic Smith-Schuster's production. Is the operative word.
Yeah, and I do listen, you look at Robert Woods, Nelson Aguilar, Sterling Shepard, Randall Cobb, Julio Jones, Marvin Jones. It's a 30-something world out there for wide receivers. You grab those guys for just a couple of bucks.
Michael Thomas.
Maybe one of those guys will fit veteran wise. The younger guys are like DJ Chark, Alan Lazard. If you want to get it, Jacoby Myers.
Jacoby Myers, by the way, is actually really good.
Yes.
And I'd be interested to see what kind of market he has, because he had that thing where he played for like 3 years without scoring a touchdown or whatever. But I think now, like, he's maybe the best free agent wide receiver that in the market if you look at efficiency stats and things like that. So
I think the reality is you can't fall in love because you won the championship, right? You had a game plan that worked. You took what was available out there, took the best of it, and poured draft picks into your roster, and it worked. I think you stay with that same game plan, and you'd bye-bye to Juju, because somebody will give him more than you really should give him. By the way, if you have any questions with your parking lot when it comes to your business, Gan Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the entire KC metro area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, proudly bringing you the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. They've been making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Find them online at ganasphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gentlemen, the toughness of Eric Bieniemy. We'll get back into the roster in a minute, but you've long talked, Jeff, and I think we can't, any negativity towards Eric Bieniemy and his style or the thought process that the alleged argument that happened at the AFC Championship game last season, which is now 2 seasons ago, we'll call it the 21 season. It was a formula that worked, right? If Andy Reid is his grandpa and the fatherly figure there, Matt Nagy was his buddy, came in, was there to be the right-hand man. You saw him at the parade. They seemed pretty chummy at the parade, Matt Nagy and Patrick Mahomes. Well, they missed the element of the guy who kicks people in the butt. Clearly Sean McCoy didn't like. He's a guy that challenges people. All that worked for a championship. So it didn't, you can't, it's not in spite of Bieniemy, or Bieniemy's why they didn't win a title. Did they miss that this coming season?
To a certain extent. I mean, it's I don't want to overstate what he brings to it, but I did like the fact that when LaShawn McCoy was coming at Bieniemy, and Tyreek Hill stood up for him and said, look, he didn't like the fact that he was telling the guy to tuck the football in, to be fumbling the football. And so, yeah, there is, I think Bieniemy has always been a consummate leader on this team, has always brought an element of toughness is the word you're using. I'll go with it. I think you need people on your staff who are going to hold people accountable and who aren't going to always do the thing that makes people like them. And that doesn't mean that Andy Reid isn't a great coach, or that Matt Nagy is not a great coach and these other guys on the staff don't do a great job. But it does mean that he is the person who is going to grind on you a little bit. And I think that was good for Patrick Mahomes. I think that was good for Travis Kelce. I think it was good for Tyreek Hill. And you've all heard those guys mentioned in different, states of their career, the way he approached it. But I do think they'll miss it to a certain degree. I don't think it's going to be everything. I don't think they're going to fall from being a championship contender. But again, that play with McKinnon, Patrick Mahomes mentioned it in his press conference when he won the MVP, that was something that Eric Bieniemy drilled into those guys in these situations. You go down, you do this, and maybe another coach doesn't bring that same element, and maybe they make a mistake there. I don't know. But yeah, I think he'll be missed for a lot of reasons.
Eric, what do you think it means? He's in Washington now, getting hopefully the final piece of his resume to make him a head coach. I like the move for him, but do we think that that's going to leave a void here in this team?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting. Like growing up, in Minnesota, I do remember when Bieniemy was the Vikings running backs coach, and I remember distinctly he in an interview said, like, look, I went to Adrian Peterson. I said, you're the best player in the league, but your fumbles are going to be why we can't win a Super Bowl. and like that was, having a play. And Bieniemy was a second round pick for the Chargers. Like he played in the league a bunch, but like he wasn't a star. Being able to have that kind of stature in the league where you're that tough guy and you're the guy that can go up and tell, because like now Mahomes is the best player in the league and he's coaches him hard. And I think, the big thing that, you talk about, Petro, which is important, is if this roster doesn't turn over that much and, you lose that guy like Bieniemy, like where is the hunger going to be to win a second Super Bowl? Like there could be a situation where, they get complacent. And I think Bieniemy leaving could be that kind of like, squeaky wheel type of thing. I mean, I hope he does great in Washington. I think he will. I think that they have some talent on the outside and stuff. So I think he'll be great in Washington. I do think the Chiefs will miss him a little bit.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. Is everybody too friendly, too comfortable with each other? And does that create a sense of complacency out of the team? Because Bieniemy certainly would shake it up. I think maybe having some edge and maybe even, the I'll show you mentality is not a bad thing to have on a roster. Patrick Mahomes' contract is certainly one to keep an eye on because they did it for a certain reason, to be able to have the kind of flexibility where if they want to, they can convert the roster bonus into signing bonus and then prorate that amount over 5 years, which means that the $34.4 million that he's due, let's call it 35 for easy math, could be converted to where it would just take 28 million off of that, prorate that over the next 4 years and create cap space. Jeff, is that something you want to do? They didn't do it last year. They did it in the first year because they had to do it. And they had this year as kind of a get out of jail free card that they could do whenever they wanted to. But, now that you've won, this kind of ties obviously back into Orlando Brown. Are you empowered to say, no, we're going to just keep taking the hit on the quarterback? And that's, ultimately as the salaries go up around him, we end up with a cheap quarterback. You keep prorating it back. You can get 1 year where he's cheap, but now you add what it would do for people like this year he's counting 49 million against the cap. Next year he's due to count 44. That would take that to 51 million. The following year he's due to count 46. That would take that to 53 million. You just add 7 over the course of the next 4 years to each one of those. That's how you get that number. What do? Take it now or shove it off for later?
I think you take it now. I mean, I've always been an advocate of that, not getting too deep into it. Now, the only thing that muddles that is, as we've said, we're talking about certain players that have value to this team that want to get paid. I just think, one, I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to pay his entire career, whatever he's going to play out the length of that contract.
Yeah,
I think the numbers are going to get to a point where they're going to say he can't be the 11th highest paid quarterback in the league, and all these guys are getting guaranteed money. And it sounds great in theory,
right?
And I know he's a team player, but 2-3 more years, trust me, if you start getting up into the $200 million guaranteed money range with the streaming money coming into the league and the salary cap going up with these new TV deals, he's going to get a new deal. And so I just think if you're at a place where you can stomach that and not get so enamored with the idea, if we got to have this guy to win this championship, I think you'll be fine. And I think this season proved that. I think if anything, you look at this season, you say, we have a great quarterback. We got some young guys who we don't have to pay a lot of money right now. We can mix and match other people in here, and we've got a good culture. And so you start making those kinds of plays with your salary cap and your quarterback and roster bonuses because you're desperate. And this team shouldn't feel desperate.
Eric, a lot of people think this deal, to Jeff's point, will be opened up. It's after year 6 was the common theme, which would be after the 25 season. So 3 more years on this deal. That's when it does have a significant jump built in to the price that he would be counting. It goes all the way to $60 million against the cap in that year. But is this a time? And when you do that, you can play that game where you bring them down to the league minimum and prorate everything towards the back end. And they maybe are in a different situation. They're not in the midst of a pandemic. New TV deals, new streaming money is there. Who knows where they'll be at that point? But what do they do about the contract this year?
Yeah, the cap raising about 8% a year, but top end quarterback deals are raising, 10 to 15%, right? So every dollar, and you talk about, I like to think of percentages. So if you prorate that money over 5 years, it's 3% more, right? So the margin becomes, okay, Pat's got to be 3% better next year, right? Or 2 years from now, every time you sort of do that. And Mahomes this year showed he could be, what was he, like 20% better this season than he was in 2021, which is fabulous. But you don't always get that, right? And you don't always get that like smooth situation. Now, the problem is with Kansas City is that they're still a stars and scrubs team. When you look at like Marquez Valdez-Scantling has the 7th highest cap hit on the team, right? So you start getting to like, they have guys on rookie deals who are top 10 cap hits for them, and Edwards-Helaire, McDuffie, and so forth. So there's not that many places to look, right? The places to look, for relief are going to be Joe Thuney's $15 million base salary. You can cut that a few different ways. Kelsey actually doesn't have that high of a number. He's the 5th highest paid guy on the team. His base salary is only $11 million. So you cut that a few different ways. It's not that much money, right? The issue that the Chiefs have is like, and we don't want to talk about this ad nauseum, but they let Frank Clark go. That money is going to go towards franchise tagging Orlando Brown to trade him or to get a deal done. So they're still basically right at the cap, and the only options that they have are to extend Chris Jones. That would open up probably $10 to $15 million or so, and then they have the Mahomes thing here. So if they want to get bring in a player who has any sort of cost, they will have to do this on Mahomes. And so I think that's the choice that they have is to either say, look, we're going to have another year where we draft and develop, and we pay out Mahomes in full, because if you pay out Mahomes in full, that next contract that you're talking about, Petro, is less onerous, right? You're starting with more of a blank slate, because when you go back to the table with Mahomes, all those prorations that you've done, those costs, that you can't just like write those off. They exist with the next deal. So, that is part of the whole thing. We're like, oh, they'll just rip up Mahomes. It's like, yes, but if you push costs to tomorrow, they still are a part of that next deal. And Mahomes is not going to be like, hey, I know that I'm costing you this much, dead, or not dead, but like this much prorated money. He's not going to do that, right? So I agree with Jeff. I think that they should try to play it out. I don't think that's what's going to happen, because I do think that they're going to look at, some free agents and stuff like that. And their cap situation, like the thing about cap intelligence is it's a diligent process. You don't just get to do 1 year and be like, oh, we're good now. It's a constant process of making solid decisions.
I think they're going to do it, because I remember the comments of Brett Veach last year when they were doing all these fiscally responsible things, and people were kind of on him. He's like, well, there'll come a time where we reset our cap, and then we can be aggressive in free agency. He was never patient in the draft. We finally saw that patience last year. I don't think he's a patient general manager by nature. Wow. And so, hey, there's candy in the jar. Let's get it. Let's grab it. He's going to want to go make it happen. Maybe not. Maybe we're wrong. And let's fold Chris Jones into this conversation, Jeff, because that is the other thing. If you were to trade Chris Jones, who at 29 years old had arguably his best season, or 28 years old had his best season in the league, you can save yourself basically $21 million right there. So is it like, listen, we could they be, now addicted to cap savings, right? Let's take the hit on Patrick Mahomes. Let's cut Frank Clark. Let's trade Orlando Brown. Let's trade Chris Jones. If you wanted to Eric's point, no, you can't in 1 year reset your whole cap. But if you wanted to set yourself up for the long haul as best you can, cut Frank Clark, trade Orlando Brown, trade Chris Jones, and do the best you can with what's out there. That would really set yourself up and allow you to keep the quarterback cost as efficient as possible this year. Do you really think that they can walk on Chris Jones?
I think it's difficult to do it because of what the year he just had. You win you win your second championship with him. Yeah, I think he's put himself in the conversation as a Hall of Famer now, with 2 rings and the numbers he's putting on. His age, you can still see him putting up a couple good seasons, a couple dominant seasons. But again, I mean, and I understand what Eric's saying, in terms of stars and scrubs. It's like this is a team that really relies heavily on 3 guys to produce: Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and Patrick Mahomes. And if you eliminate him from the equation entirely, like, what does that defensive line look like? What does that defense look like? How much flexibility do they have in terms of what Spagnuolo can call? And just are you getting those key sacks when you need to have them down the stretch? As much as we'll sit here and celebrate what this team did this year, their margin for error was not that great, and there are a lot of games that they could have gone the other way for them just because those 3 players were playing such a high level.
Well, I think you said it perfectly. This team, quarterback, best player in the league by a mile this year. Yep. One of the best coaches in football. They hit on 8 of 10 draft picks, yep. Right? They moved on from 2 of their best players in Matthew and Hill in a very intelligent way. They won 14 games and got the 1 seed and won the Super Bowl by 3 points. And many people think that was a noisy thing. The margin for error it's just so thin in this league that it's like I said, like, good, solid cap management and roster management is a diligent. It's not just a 1-year thing. It's like a diet, right? It's like a diligent thing where you can't binge on every so often. Be like it's a diligent thing, and that makes tough decisions really, really important.
Here's what I'm curious about. Here are the ages. We'll take your old employer, PFF, and their grades for the defensive tackle spot. If you just go down the ages of the D tackle spot, Chris Jones was at the top, 28.6, right? I'll just round to make it easy, 29. 25-year-old Dexter Lawrence, 32-year-old Aaron Donald, 25-year-old Quinnen Williams, 34-year-old Cam Hayward, DJ Reader, 29, 25-year-old Derek Brown. Kind of all over the place. I mean, is it a position that you can sign a 4-year deal on Chris Jones and expect him to continue to play at a high level? Like, if we were talking about running back, we would all be running from a 29-year-old running back, right? D tackle shows, a proclivity to maybe allow guys to still be very good at older ages. How good will he be if you like that? To me, that's the answer. Is how many years do we got to keep him? Well, you're talking about at least a 3-year commitment. The deal will probably say 4 or 5, but it'll be at least 3 years before you can get out from under it. How good of a football player do you think Chris Jones will be, Jeff, at age 29, 30, and 31 years old?
I think 29 he'll be good. I think beyond that, you start getting a little bit concerned because his game is really about quickness. I mean, he's a huge guy, but he's got a great first step. And that's where he dominates. And once you start losing that, like, he's not going to go in there and be Cortez Kennedy. He's not going to be, plugging holes and filling gaps. So that's really the calculus that Brett Veach just got to figure out. Like, how many more good years can I get out of a player who really is an athletic freak? And there is no certain. I mean, Aaron Donald signed a huge deal after they won a championship last year, and he didn't have a great year. He got banged up, got hurt down the stretch.
And we have history where Jones, like, I know people don't like to hear it, but like, Jones is up and down from an effort standpoint. And how hungry is he going to be after, like, the same song and dance as before? They win a Super Bowl, he's up for a new deal, and you give him one. And like, was Chris Jones is a fantastic player, but was he dominant the way he was dominant in 22 and 20 and 21? No. Like, so, I mean, it's all about making gambles here.
All right. So let's put it this way. We've got Orlando Brown. We've got Frank Clark. We've got Patrick Mahomes contract. We've got Chris Jones contract. First, let me ask you, I'll come back to that. We'll say, we'll put out there what we would do. What does Chris Jones do? He's got him right. Like, does he go to, I thought it was of note that at the parade, he was the one that stepped to the mic and said, run it back, right? He was the one that was trying to get the fans chanting, run it back. It wasn't like, get me paid, it was, which I granted, no one's going to walk up and say that, but I just thought it was kind of significant that maybe he's not looking at it the way Tyreek Hill did, that going into my final year, it's either pay me or trade me. Now his agent will have a long chat with him. Agents will have a long chat with him and maybe say, all right, listen, that's great. We want to run it back, but we got to get you paid first. if you're Chris Jones, do you show up at camp? Where do you sit going into the final year of the deal if you're Chris Jones, Jeff?
You're pushing for this. And I'll go so far as to say I'm assuming he might have been inebriated when he was going team versus over me. That always sounds good in front of a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people. But no, I think that he is going to push hard to get a deal done. Look, I think we all know this. Players at this point in their careers, with what he's done, he's going to want to get what he can get. And his market will never be any higher than what it's going to be right now. And so he saw what Aaron Donald got paid. He knows what a guy like Quentin Williams is going to be worth. He's going to want a lot of money, and he's going to have an argument for it too.
Yeah, Eric, I'm going to hold him out if I'm his agent. What advice are you giving him?
Well, you have to hold in, which is like a little bit awkward, right? I think the problem is neither 28 million cap hit is untenable for both sides, right? So I just don't. I agree with you that if it was like a front loaded deal where now he's coming up on year 4 and it's like 20 million, then Chris Jones could be a good soldier and play on that and then move on. But it's 28 million as far as a cap hit. So like the Chiefs can't play with him on that number either. Yeah. And he can't deal with the lack of long-term commitment here. So I think if something happens and do they trade him? I've gone back and forth. I think like my head says to trade him. But like there's parts of me that are like, if you trade him, who the heck is that defense next year? Like it's L'Jarius Sneed. And we have to talk about Sneed this offseason too. And like stuff like that. Like, do you just remake the face of the defense? When they introduced that starting defense at Arrowhead, the last two guys are Frank Clark and Chris Jones. And that's because those are the two stars of the defense. And both those guys could be gone if you trade Jones.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we've got 4 guys, right, that are big tickets on this team that have things you can do. You can re-sign Chris Jones or trade Chris Jones. You can roll the money back on Patrick Mahomes or play on the current deal. You can either franchise tag or get a deal done at what I think we all would agree would be more than you're probably comfortable paying Orlando Brown, but he's not asking for less than he was asking for last year after the playoffs that he just had, and you can cut Frank Clark. What are you doing, Jeff? Or what would you do? What do you think they'll do?
I think Brown is going to be gone. I don't know if they'll franchise him because
that's you or that's what they would do.
What I would do. You want me to predict?
Yeah, both. I want to hear what you would do and what you think they'll do.
I would let Brown go. I think that they probably will end up franchising him. I think Eric's right. I think they'll find a way to move some money around and franchise him. I think Frank Clark, I would let him go, and I think they'll let him go. I think Chris Jones, I would try to find a way to trade him. I think they will extend him. And the fourth one is Juju. Is that the fourth one?
No, it's Patrick Mahomes. Whether or not he can hold back his money.
I think because of the deals we're talking about, the Orlando Brown situation and Chris Jones, I think they'll end up moving some money around to make that work with Mahomes.
And would you?
I would not do it.
Okay. Eric?
I'm in complete lockstep with Jeff. I think in a weird way, Frank Clark comes back to Kansas City because I don't think he's going to have that good of a market after they cut him. So like everybody's like, oh, he'll take a pay cut. No, like they'll cut him, let him explore his options. And I do think he will come back because I do think that this is where he adds the most value, weirdly, in the NFL, but they'll cut him first. Jones, they'll extend. And Mahomes, they'll restructure. Orlando Brown, I'm 50-50 on. I do think they'll franchise tag him though again. And what I would do is I would let Orlando Brown walk. I'd sign Andrew Wiley to a modest deal and just have one tackle that I know and pray to God that Lucas Niang, Prince Tegawagu, or somebody else can command left tackle in the draft. And with Mahomes, I would try. I just don't think they can, with the cap the way it is, that you need to sign your 12 draft picks and stuff like that. So I would try not to convert that, but they're probably going to. And then with Jones, I would try to trade Jones, but I understand, the issues associated with that now, given how well he played this year.
Yeah, I would keep the quarterback on his current deal. I would trade Orlando Brown for whatever I could get. I would trade Chris Jones for whatever I could get. And I would cut Frank Clark and move on and say we're going to play with the young guys. Hopefully I'm armed with more draft picks and I can do it. But what I think they will do is, like everybody else. Roll back Patrick Mahomes, franchise Orlando Brown, and ultimately sign Orlando Brown this time. I think he gets done on a multi-year deal. That happens.
Really? Ooh.
I'm with Eric. I don't even know that he gets to the market on Frank Clark. I think they may just redo that deal and bring that number down even more. But Eric's got a good point. He's probably going to want to see what is the market for him. He's probably going to have a higher opinion of himself than maybe we would have. And I think with Chris Jones, they'll sign him to an extension that brings the number down. I think this is their core group, and they're going to keep him. At least Chris Jones, Orlando Brown, Patrick Mahomes are going to be the expensive guys on this team moving forward. I think that's the way it'll end up looking. One more guy, the running back position, ClydeEdwards-Helaire. Is there a spot for him next year, Jeff? Or there's not much value in cutting him.
No.
But what is the fact that he no-showed the parade significant?
I think it's a big statement.
He no-showed this season too, so he's being consistent.
Yeah. Now, I think he'll be on the roster, but it would not surprise me if they went through training camp and said, let's just cut him and move on. I think that obviously he's got they have an affinity for him. He's a good dude. He was a first-round pick. Brett Beach's name's attached to that. They want to see him succeed in every way possible, but I just don't see where, even McKinnon, I don't know where he's going to be next year, given his age. And maybe he raised his market value a little bit, but he's in his 30s now. But yeah, I just think ClydeEdwards-Helaire, his skill set doesn't fit what they want to be offensively, and they found a way to make that happen with Pacheco. Whoever they add to that mix with Pacheco is probably going to be a better option than ClydeEdwards-Helaire. So I just don't see where he's anything more than a serviceable third-string guy.
There's about $900,000 in savings if you would cut him, Eric. What do you think happens with him?
Yeah, I don't think it's worth it for them to cut him. I think they bring him along all year, but man, they just need to rehabilitate his mind, right? Like, remember that long run he had against the Chargers where he's holding the ball with two hands? Like, he's so afraid to fumble. Like, he's not explosive anymore. I do think Chiefs fans have to mark in some regression for Pacheco just because that's kind of how it works at the position. So I think that they dampen some of their risk by having him in the mix. And then they probably draft a guy, or they go with, Jerrion Ely. I know they moved him to wideout, but he's also been a running back before. I think that they brought him back on futures. And then they go with I think they're emboldened to say, look, like, we got a guy in the 7th round that was useful, and we'll get another guy in the 7th round that's useful. They probably let Rojo go, probably let McKinnon go. And kind of have a modern NFL backfield full of guys that kind of are interchangeable.
Yeah. I don't know. Nobody wanted to comment about why, at least when I was asking around, why he wasn't at the parade, which says to me that it was not approved. If nobody wants to say, oh, well, this or that, that can upset some people if you don't want that mindset in your locker room. We'll see how it plays out. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. We'll talk NFL draft already, as Jeff and Eric will be at the NFL Combine all this week, soaking up all the information. So we'll dive into that next week here on Red, Gold, and Bold. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Consumer Sports, my name is Soren Petro. We want to thank our sponsor, Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Remember, free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. They're the best at making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City. They've been doing it since 1994, and they're even hiring right now. If you're looking, all positions, project manager, dump truck drivers, operators, crew members, starting pay up to $30 per hour with paid time off and insurance among some of the benefits. Find out more at GannAsphalt.com. That's GannAsphalt.com. We will see you next week here on